Imagine dedicating years of your life to building something from the ground up, pouring your heart, soul, sweat, and countless sleepless nights into every detail, only to be escorted out of it one rainy morning as if you had never mattered at all. Most people would walk away defeated, broken by the betrayal and the public humiliation. But Dean Foster was not most people. With a calm resolve that came from deep within, he made one single phone call that turned the entire company upside down. By the end of that very day, the executives who had been celebrating his downfall were the ones packing their own boxes, their faces pale with shock and disbelief. Dean Foster had never cared much for titles, corner offices, or public attention. Every single morning before the sun rose, his day began with the same quiet rituals that grounded him. He would wake up early, prepare a warm breakfast for his young son, pack a nutritious lunch with care, and always slip a handwritten note inside the lunchbox. Those notes were simple but powerful reminders. Be brave today, my boy, and always choose kindness. After dropping his son off at school with a hug and words of encouragement, Dean would drive to the manufacturing company he had helped build from nothing, through years of sacrifice. To the average employee bustling through the factory floors, Dean appeared to be just an ordinary engineering consultant, quiet, unassuming, often found tinkering with machines or reviewing technical blueprints. Few knew that this modest man walking among the assembly lines had once been the company's true founder. Even fewer understood the depth of the choice he had made years earlier. It had all started after the heartbreaking loss of his wife. Grief-stricken but determined to be the father his young son desperately needed, Dean made the hardest decision of his life. Instead of chasing prestige, expanding the business aggressively, or seeking the spotlight, he chose family. He appointed a capable new CEO to handle day-to-day operations while he stepped back from the public eye. The company continued to flourish financially under this arrangement, and Dean remained quietly involved behind the scenes, solving complex technical problems, mentoring engineers, and ensuring the heart of the operation stayed true to its roots. It seemed like the perfect balance at first, but success, as it often does, has a way of changing people in unexpected and sometimes dangerous ways. The new CEO, Vanessa Sinclair, quickly embraced the role of public figure. Business magazines ran glowing profiles praising her visionary leadership. Investors flocked to her confident presentations. Employees watched as she gave high-profile interviews, accepted industry awards on glittering stages, and spoke at prestigious conferences around the country. Gradually, the company's origin story began to shift in subtle but significant ways. The old photographs of the tiny garage where Dean had first assembled prototypes with his own hands quietly disappeared from the lobby walls. New orientation videos for employees stopped mentioning the founder entirely. Press releases and articles started crediting Vanessa with building the entire enterprise from scratch, as if the early struggles and breakthroughs had never happened. Dean noticed every single change. He saw the erasure of history, the rewriting of narratives, but he chose not to fight over credit or recognition. To him, the machines on the factory floor mattered far more than headlines or accolades. His son's innocent smile at the dinner table mattered more than any corporate trophy. He remained silent, focusing on what truly counted. Yet while Dean stayed in the background, something far more insidious was happening beneath the polished surface of the company. The culture began to shift slowly but unmistakably. Experienced engineers and loyal workers who valued craftsmanship were gradually replaced by individuals who prioritized appearances, networking, and short-term optics. Cost-cutting measures started overriding critical safety concerns. Longtime employees who dared to question questionable decisions suddenly found themselves sidelined, ignored in meetings, or quietly pushed out the door. Dean tried offering his expertise during executive meetings, drawing from years of hands-on knowledge. Each time, Vanessa would politely but firmly dismiss him. Eventually, she stopped pretending to value his input at all. In one particularly memorable meeting, Dean warned strongly against switching to a much cheaper supplier for critical components, explaining how it could introduce serious quality and safety risks down the line. Vanessa smiled confidently at the room full of executives. "Dean understands machines well," she said dismissively. "But we'll let the real executives handle the business side." A few people chuckled uncomfortably. Others stared down at their notebooks, avoiding eye contact. Dean didn't raise his voice or argue. He simply wrote one word on his legal pad: drift. That single word captured everything. The company wasn't collapsing in a dramatic crash. It was drifting, slowly but steadily, away from the core values of integrity, quality, and innovation that had built it in the first place. Over the following months, Dean's quiet observations turned into something more deliberate. Strange financial records began catching his trained eye. Consulting firms were charging enormous fees with vague explanations and minimal deliverables. Vendor payments appeared inconsistent or inflated. Contracts were approved without proper documentation or competitive bidding. Individually, none of these incidents proved outright wrongdoing, but together, they painted a disturbing pattern of potential mismanagement and self-dealing. Without accusing anyone openly, Dean began documenting everything methodically. He copied invoices, saved important emails, compared supplier prices against market rates, and cross-checked contracts against delivery records. Every piece of evidence went into a secure, encrypted file, stored completely outside the company's servers. He never acted impulsively. He simply gathered facts with the patience of a man who had built something real from nothing. The deeper he investigated, the more troubling the picture became. Funds appeared to be flowing toward shell companies, connected to people close to the CEO. Company assets were being undervalued in internal reports. Major strategic decisions seemed oddly designed to weaken the business's position, perhaps to facilitate a future sale at a discount. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Confidential documents revealed ongoing negotiations to sell controlling ownership of the company to a large private investment firm. The buyers operated under the assumption that the majority shareholder was an inactive family trust with no one actively protecting its interests. What they didn't realize was that Dean Foster himself controlled that trust. Legally, quietly, and completely. The company that executives believed they dominated actually still belonged to the unassuming man fixing machines in the back of the factory. Instead of rushing to confront Vanessa, Dean remained patient and strategic. He consulted his attorney to verify every document. Independent financial experts reviewed the transactions thoroughly. The evidence grew stronger and more comprehensive with each passing week. Months went by as the executives grew increasingly confident in their control, believing no one was truly watching or capable of challenging them. Until the morning, when everything finally exploded. Rain hammered relentlessly against the large windows of the company auditorium as hundreds of employees gathered for what was billed as an important company-wide meeting. Vanessa stood proudly on the brightly lit stage, announcing exciting changes and a supposedly bright future ahead. Applause rippled through the crowd. Her smile widened as she delivered the final blow. As part of our strategic restructuring, she announced with theatrical flair, Dean Foster's consulting services are no longer required. We thank him for his many years of contribution. The room fell into an awkward silence. Security guards approached Dean from the sides. Without a word of protest, Dean calmly stood up, picked up the single cardboard box containing his few personal belongings, and walked toward the exit with quiet dignity. Some employees lowered their heads in discomfort, others watched in stunned disbelief. Almost no one noticed the slight knowing smile on Dean's face as he stepped out into the pouring rain. Because while everyone else believed he had just lost everything, Dean knew the real story had only just begun. Outside, standing beneath the downpour, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made one calm, measured call. When the person on the other end answered, Dean spoke only 4 words. Fire every one of them. The voice on the other end didn't hesitate. Understood, came the firm reply. Within hours, emergency legal notices were delivered to key executives. The board of directors was urgently summoned. The pending investment deal was immediately frozen. Teams of financial investigators entered the building, armed with warrants and detailed evidence. The executives who had openly celebrated Dean's dismissal suddenly realized they had made the gravest mistake of their professional careers. They hadn't merely fired a consultant or pushed out an old employee. They had publicly humiliated and underestimated the true owner of the entire company. By sunset that same day, the same executives who had ordered security to escort Dean out were themselves being escorted from the premises. Their access badges were revoked, their authority stripped away, and their questionable decisions placed under full investigation. The power dynamic had flipped completely in a matter of hours. Throughout the entire ordeal, Dean never raised his voice. He never sought personal revenge or public spectacle. He simply allowed the truth, backed by meticulous evidence, to speak louder than any ego or ambition ever could. Real leadership, he believed, isn't measured by who stands on stage collecting applause and awards. It's measured by who quietly carries the responsibility, protects the vision, and upholds the values when nobody else is watching. That evening, Dean arrived home just in time for dinner with his son. They shared a simple meal of pancakes together, laughed over silly dinosaur stories, and ended the day exactly as they always had: connected, grateful, and at peace. The company had been saved from further decline. Justice had been served quietly and effectively. But to Dean, the greatest victory wasn't reclaiming control of the business, it was protecting the future he had sacrificed so much to build for his child. In the weeks that followed, Dean gradually returned to a more active role, but this time with trusted leaders who shared his original values. The company culture began to heal, refocusing on quality, integrity, and the people who had helped build it. Dean continued his quiet morning routines, reminding himself and his son that true success isn't about power or recognition. It's about the legacy you leave in the lives you touch, and the principles you refuse to compromise.